Let's talk to Mark Littlewood, Director of Popular Conservatism UK. Mark, very good morning to you.
Morning, Mike. Great to be with you.
I just spoke to Simon Calder, who I think pretty much summed up the state of our nation. He's just arrived at Heathrow because he had to fly there rather than try to use the tube. And as he came out from the terminal into the area where trains are going, there's a guy standing there saying, "Terribly sorry, but nothing's working."
Yeah. Yes, we might as well put that sign up pretty much everywhere across the country, I would have thought, Mike.
I mean, it's hard to imagine how this government has so quickly, completely and utterly dissolved even the fairly crappy kind of state of affairs they inherited. They've completely just blown up the whole place, haven't they?
Yeah, I think that's right. It was interesting to hear that Andrew Marr clip, because I think that was more or less straight out of the Labour Party's playbook. I think they believed just over a year ago, at the time of the general election, that all that was really required was to remove the Tories and put them in, and then because of some magical osmosis, because they were the great and the good, the UK would suddenly be healed. I mean, talking of the tube strikes, Mike, you remember that they seemed supremely confident that they would end industrial strife.
Yeah.
It seems to be getting worse, doesn't it?
Well, so far we've had train strikes, we've had doctor strikes, we've had nurses strikes coming, I think, every time. We've got tube driver strikes. You know, it doesn't stop, does it?
No, it doesn't stop. And bear in mind, the strategy of the Labour government at the outset was to pay these people more money with money that we didn't really have. Well, that hasn't assuaged the trade unions at all, it seems. I mean, it's a bit like a strategy of feeding your left arm to the alligator in the hope that will satiate its appetite. I'm afraid it doesn't.
Yeah.
So they keep coming back for more. So
except in Starmer's case, he's feeding my right arm to them as opposed to his own.
Yes, well, that's right. Yes, he's feeding us one by one.
Yeah.
He's feeding us one by one. So, yeah, my sense is nothing works. I mean, this emergency alarm system yesterday, it didn't go off on my phone. So I'm now trying to work out whether the government has earmarked me as one of the people who can safely die in a national emergency, or perhaps I should be more optimistic and hope I'm one of the people earmarked for whatever nuclear bunker the remaining Labour government will be in. So, yeah, nothing much to bring us cheer, Mike, is there, other than your upbeat analysis.
Well, this is it, and I mean, I like to try and keep people amused, so I'm going to show you what BBC did yesterday when the emergency alert was leading up to its announcement.
And the idea is there's going to be a 10-second siren sound, and your phone is going to vibrate. 2 seconds. Ah.
Oh. Right, we are right on 3 o'clock. I've got no alerts. My phone's not vibrating.
We're running late.
And I'm not on either of my phones. There you go.
So it should be that phones that are connected to the 4G or 5G network should go off any time now.
It's not just me, is it? It's not just...
Well, it's not going off on my phone either. This could turn out to be some classic television here.
Yeah, not quite classic, but there we are. The funny thing about that one, Mark, is the BBC presenter outing herself as having a burner phone. I'm not quite sure why.
Yeah. Well, also the other thing, quite typical BBC, they seem bewildered and surprised when a state project doesn't work perfectly.
Yes.
We shouldn't be bewildered or surprised when a state project doesn't work perfectly. You would have thought the lead-up is, a bit sceptical this is going to work at all. But no, when the government doesn't do, when the government plan doesn't work, the BBC presenters seem to be amazingly surprised.
Exactly.
I think it's now water off a duck's back. I expect it not to work.
Well, I was watching and listening on Friday as I was driving around some of the comments on the demise of Angela Rayner, and you might have been forgiven if you just landed from a spaceship from Mars for thinking she just died. There were people going on about how tragic it all was and how terrible it was for her. What an amazing woman. Ed Miliband calling her one of the greatest politicians of our times. His words, not mine. Meanwhile, there's still an awful lot of questions, it seems to me, to be asked about, one, how she managed to inflate artificially the price of the house in Ashton-under-Lyne in order to extract 165,000 quid from it as 25%, which she could then put in to the house down in Hove, because it seems to me that there's a lot of questions around that still.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, I obviously don't know what the appropriate valuation of a house is, but or was. But the important thing here in law, Mike, is that whatever transaction was made on that house has to be decided to have been in the interest of her disabled son.
Right.
It's a trust set up for his benefit. So the big question is, was it clearly to his benefit to see his share in that property go from 50% to 75%,
Right.
and lose about 160k out of the trust fund. I mean, I guess an argument could be made for that. I don't know what that argument would be, but that argument would have to be made. Or was the transaction in Angela Rayner's benefit, who needed to lay her hands on 160 grand or so to put down a deposit on a flat that she fancied buying in Hove? On the face of it, it looks a little bit more like the latter, doesn't it?
Well,
looks
it does.
Like really the transaction was done for her benefit, not her son's benefit.
Yeah.
And that is not the way that you're allowed to run a trust. It has to be run for the benefit of the beneficiaries, not for the benefit of the trustees.
Well, that's certainly something that my understanding of was exactly that last week when I was asking you about it. And also now she's in the frame for a £17,000 payoff, which basically she had campaigned to stop. She said she didn't think it was right that cabinet members should get a payoff, particularly if they had to resign because of some kind of scandal.
Yes, she couldn't have been clearer about this. And I think one of the causes of her demise has been not just her behaviour, but how vigorous and rigorous she was about any Tory cabinet minister who sort of put a tick in the wrong box or even began to even sniff that they might not have paid all of the tax that they were liable for. She showed no mercy at all. There was never any suggestion from Angela Rayner to say, well, this doesn't look very good on the surface from this particular Tory, but let's allow justice to take its course. Oh, no. The first remotest smell of bad behaviour, she was calling for their heads. And you're right about this payout, Mike. She was saying that if people are dismissed because of a breach of conduct or a breach of the ministerial code, they shouldn't get the payout. I guess you could probably say perhaps if a minister has to resign, I don't know, on grounds of ill health, for example, you might be eligible for the payout. And I think it would be remarkable now if she were to accept this payout. Obviously, I don't know her financial circumstances. They've clearly worsened as a result of her resignation. But the odd thing that she's done, rather daft thing she's done politically, I think, Mike, is if you want any chance of a future political comeback, the best thing to do is to resign quickly.
Which she didn't do.
The blame, which she didn't do. And you then hope that people forgive you later down the line, having clung on by her fingernails to the last possible moment, and now still, as I understand it, not ruling out taking a severance payment that she didn't believe that Conservative ministers should get, that she wanted prohibited and will be prohibited, I think, come October, would be extraordinary behaviour. I think she would make a resurrection of a future political career even less likely if she now takes that money.
I think so. I mean, of course, on the other side of the argument, 17 grand is almost half of the 40,000 she's got to give to the taxman for messing up. We haven't still heard really from HMRC as to whether or not they're going to fine her. I was saying to people last Friday, I made a late payment by mistake once because my accountant forgot to remind me to the VAT man, and I got fined a bunch of money. And when I wrote to them appealing it and saying, look, I'm really sorry, it was an oversight, they didn't take that as an excuse. They said, well, I'm sorry, we're still going to have to fine you. Simple as that.
Yeah,
we know
exactly
that you've paid for years and years and years. You never missed a payment. You've missed one payment. Here's a fine, and they didn't let me off with it.
No, exactly right. I think many of us have experiences like that you make some sort of genuine error, slip of the pen, something gets in the way, you fess up to it immediately. You will find that the authorities are typically merciless in clawing the money back and fining you. Virtually no leeway for the average citizen. So I don't think there should be any leeway for the ex-Deputy Prime Minister either. You would have think that there was an even greater burden on her, not just because of what was a senior role in government, but because she could not have been clearer how much it mattered to her, that everybody must follow the rules exactly by the letter, and not to do so should lead to your elimination from public life. So I hope that there is no question of the HMRC going lightly on her, because they sure as heck don't go lightly on the rest of us, do they?
No, exactly right. And I mean, for most ordinary people watching this morning, £17,000 is a lot of money, as is 40,000, and some people have already asked me how she got 40 grand to just pass over to HMRC that she's had lying around a bank account. Most people don't make that in a year. 17,000 quid is a payoff for having to leave the government in disgrace. I think is a ludicrous and a ridiculously outmoded system. You know, it's designed for the old days when these people didn't really have proper jobs, you know, and they'd have to sort of go off back to the shires and, you know, so they'd have to spend it on buying a few more cattle or something, you know. But let me ask you about the state of Keir Starmer, because, you know, as much as he's tried to rehabilitate his government on Friday by doing this kind of fake appointment scenario, shuffling the pack, everybody knows he's on very much borrowed time now, isn't he?
Yes, I suppose that's right. But I mean, the borrowed time could, I'm afraid, stretch out quite a long way into the future. A bit like, you know, their plan to sort of solve industrial strife. They keep telling us that economic growth is their top priority. But again, they just seem to be trying to will it into existence without actually having an economic plan to bring it about. It's a sort of rain dance. They think if they keep saying economic growth enough, economic growth will emerge. Well, it's not the way the economy works. I've seen some newspaper reports today that the Blairites are back to try and bring about economic growth. But you dig into the reports, what are they actually going to do to bring about economic growth? Because we have on the horizon now Angela Rayner's workers' bill to give workers more rights, supposedly, in the workplace. Well, that means you're giving businesses much more costs. They will be much more reluctant to take on new workers. So despite the fact they seem to be wishing economic growth as a kind of soundbite, it's nearly impossible to find any policy that I think a sensible economist would say, oh yeah, that will lead to economic growth. Right. And it's very easy to find a lot of policies that you think would push in the other direction. That's to say, dampen economic growth.
Well, one of the things that they mentioned in the Times piece this morning is that there's going to be a kind of an overall kind of stripping away, perhaps, of some of the net zero policies. But so far, one of the few cabinet members who's not been moved is Ed Miliband. Surely, if you wanted to change the net zero rules, first of all, you'd move Ed Miliband out of the way and make sure that you put somebody in who's a bit more progressive and who might actually say, do you know what, some of this stuff isn't really necessary.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, and I think you need to go much further than that. Again, the implication is, isn't it, Mike, that they're going to sort of edge away from some of the madder parts of the green policy. But I think you've got to actually say, look, carbon net zero by 2050 isn't merely impossible, it's total madness. We're abandoning that target. Our main aim is going to be make sure that we have cheap energy, because you've basically got a choice.
They keep saying it, but it gets more. Yeah, but they keep saying we're going to get cheap energy, but it just keeps going up.
Yeah, of course, because your choice is carbon net zero or cheap energy. Pick a lane. Right. So far, they've picked the lane of carbon net zero. Now, maybe they'll swerve a little bit off that lane, but I think only a smidgen. I mean, our energy costs in Britain, Mike, I think are about 3, nearly 4 times what they are in the United States of America. Yeah. Are you expecting energy-intensive businesses to remotely compete with the Americans, let alone everything else that's going on? So if you want growth, let's go for cheap energy and let's put carbon net zero firmly on the back burner. But I don't see any signs of that happening for as long as Ed Miliband's in post.
Well, we look out for Keir Starmer's first tweet of the day, or lie of the day, as I like to call it. This one has just come in from about 14 minutes ago. Investing in defence means investing in Britain's future. Working people across the country will have access to more opportunities, from engineering jobs to skilled apprenticeships, backing British jobs, British industry and British innovators. I mean, you might as well have written it in Chinese. What does it mean?
Yes. Well, quite. I mean, I think what he's trying to get across is if the government invests in a particular sector, it generates jobs in that particular sector. I mean, that is technically true. The problem they've got, the wider picture they've got, that they are absolutely refusing or are, if you like, emotionally and politically incapable of grappling with, is the big problem in Britain is that regulation is way too high, government spending is way too high, and taxes are way too high. Yeah. And although I do favour an increase in the defence budget, it's got to be at the expense of other areas of expenditure. We can't just see the government continuing to spend more and more on everything, because guess what? Governments don't generally spend money as well and as efficiently as the private sector does. And if you really want to generate jobs, growth, encourage enterprise, see higher rates of return, allow people to save for their retirement, allow people to spend more money in the economy, it's the private sector that's got to do the heavy lifting. And all the government really needs to do is to take their foot off the private sector's throat. Well, this government hasn't really shown a great willingness or propensity to do that, sadly, and that's why I expect growth to be extremely sluggish for the foreseeable future, which is bad news for the Labour government, but more importantly, bad news for the British people.
Absolutely right. Great to talk to you, Mark Littlewood. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks, Director of Popular Conservatism UK.